boy returns from death with a shocking message from Jesus. It was an ordinary autumn afternoon, the kind of day that seemed almost too perfect to hold any hint of tragedy. The sun filtered through the amber leaves of the trees, painting the streets of the quiet Midwestern town in hues of gold and orange. 12-year-old Noah, with his sandy blonde hair and a mischievous grin that seemed to light up every room, was playing in the backyard with his little sister, Grace. She idolized him, following his every move as though he were a superhero. And to her, he was. "Noah, look!" Grace called out, holding up a leaf she had found, its edges curled and its veins painted a deep crimson. Noah turned to her, laughing. "Nice, Grace. Bet you can't find one bigger than this." He waved a massive leaf he'd plucked from the maple tree. Their mother watched them from the kitchen window, her hands submerged in soapy water as she washed the lunch dishes. She smiled, pausing for a moment to savor the sound of their laughter. It was these small moments, the unremarkable ones, that she cherished most. They made the long days and sleepless nights of motherhood worth it. But something had been weighing on her mind. Noah had been different lately. He tired more easily, his cheeks had lost their rosy hue, and his once boundless energy seemed to wane. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was going through a growth spurt or catching a cold. But deep down, a mother's intuition whispered that something wasn't right. Later that evening during dinner, Noah barely touched his food. He poked at his mashed potatoes with his fork, his usual chatter replaced by a quiet that made the room feel heavier. "Not hungry, buddy?" his father asked, raising an eyebrow. Noah shrugged, his head down. "Just tired," he muttered. That night, after Noah and Grace were tucked into bed, their mother sat at the edge of the couch, her hands gripping the armrests. "I think we need to take him to the doctor," she said softly to her husband, her voice laced with worry. He nodded, though he tried to mask his own growing unease. "Let's make an appointment tomorrow." The next day at the pediatrician's office, Noah swung his legs back and forth on the examination table, looking more annoyed than anything else. "I'm fine, Mom," he insisted, rolling his eyes. She smiled weakly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Humor me, okay?" The doctor entered with a warm smile, joking with Noah to ease his nerves. But as the checkup progressed, that smile began to falter. Noah's pale skin, the bruises that seemed to appear without reason, the fatigue, it was all adding up to something far more serious than a cold. "I think we need to run some tests," the doctor said, his tone cautious. The next few days passed in a blur of blood draws, scans, and hushed conversations between doctors. Noah's parents clung to each other, praying desperately for good news. But when the results came back, their world was shattered. "Your son has leukemia," the oncologist said gently, her words heavy with compassion. Noah's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. His father stared blankly at the floor, as if trying to process the unthinkable. And Noah, sweet, innocent Noah, sat silently, his wide eyes brimming with confusion and fear. He didn't understand exactly what leukemia was, but he could tell from his parents' reaction that it was bad, really bad. The weeks that followed were like stepping onto a roller coaster they hadn't signed up for. Noah was admitted to the children's hospital, where he was hooked up to machines that beeped and whirred, their sterile sounds a constant reminder of the battle ahead. Chemotherapy began almost immediately, and with it came the side effects: nausea, hair loss, and a fatigue so profound that Noah sometimes struggled to even lift his head from the pillow. Despite the pain, Noah's spirit never fully dimmed. He joked with the nurses, made silly faces to make Grace laugh when she visited, and told his parents, "I'm going to beat this. You'll see." His courage was both inspiring and heartbreaking. He was so young, so full of life, yet here he was, fighting a battle most adults couldn't comprehend. But as the months dragged on, the treatments took a toll. His small frame grew thinner, his cheeks hollow, his once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion. His parents watched helplessly, praying every night for a miracle. "Please, God," his mother whispered into the darkness as she knelt by his hospital bed. "Don't take him from us. He's just a child. Please." One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital window, casting the room in a warm, golden glow, Noah turned to his mother. "Mum," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She leaned in close, brushing her fingers gently across his forehead. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Do you think Jesus is real?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Her heart ached at the question. "Of course I do," she said, her voice trembling. "Why do you ask?" Noah hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the ceiling. "Because if I don't wake up tomorrow, I want to know he'll be there, waiting for me." Tears filled her eyes as she cupped his face in her hands. "Oh, Noah," she whispered. "He will. I promise you, he will." That night, Noah's condition worsened. His breathing became labored, his heart rate erratic. Doctors rushed into the room, their voices tense as they worked to stabilize him. His parents were ushered into the hallway, where they clung to each other, sobbing as they prayed. "Please, God," his mother begged, "don't let this be the end." Inside the room, Noah's small body went still. The heart monitor flatlined, its steady tone a piercing sound that shattered the silence. The doctors tried everything, but after several minutes they called the time of death. Noah was gone. But Noah's journey was far from over. The moment Noah's heart stopped, everything changed. One instant, he was surrounded by the frantic beeping of machines and the desperate voices of doctors. The next, there was silence. Complete, all-encompassing silence. Noah didn't feel pain anymore. He didn't feel the weight of his frail body or the coldness of the hospital bed. Instead, he felt light, weightless, as though he were floating. He tried to open his eyes, but when he did, the world around him was unrecognizable. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital room were gone, replaced by a soft, golden glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air was warm, filled with a peace that Noah had never known, and yet it hummed with a quiet power that made his heart, or whatever he had now, race. He looked down at himself, surprised to find that he no longer appeared sick. The thin, pale body, ravaged by months of chemotherapy, was gone, replaced by a healthy, vibrant form. He touched his face, his chest, his arms, marveling at how strong he felt. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no pain, no exhaustion, no fear. And then he heard it, a voice, soft but unmistakable, calling his name. "Noah!" He turned, searching for the source of the voice. At first, he saw nothing, only the endless golden light stretching in every direction. But then, in the distance, a figure began to emerge. As it came closer, Noah's breath caught in his throat. The figure was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Clothed in pure white that shimmered like sunlight on water, the man's presence radiated love and strength in equal measure. His face was kind and familiar, yet it carried an authority that made Noah want to fall to his knees. "You know who I am," the figure said, his voice resonating deep within Noah's soul. Tears welled in Noah's eyes as he nodded. "You're Jesus." Jesus smiled, and in that moment, every doubt, every fear, every ounce of pain Noah had ever felt melted away. "I am," he said gently. "Do not be afraid, Noah. You are safe here." Noah felt a wave of emotion crash over him. He wanted to say so much, to ask so many questions, but all he could manage was a whisper. "Why am I here? Am I dead?" Jesus' expression grew serious, though his eyes remained filled with love. "Your time on earth is not over," he said, "but I have brought you here to show you something you must tell others when you return." Noah's brow furrowed. "Return? You mean I'm going back?" Jesus nodded. "You have a purpose, Noah. There is a message you must deliver. But first, come with me." Before Noah could respond, the golden light around them began to shift. The warmth faded, replaced by a cold, oppressive darkness. Noah shivered as the air grew heavy, and the peaceful hum was replaced by a low, mournful wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ground beneath him felt solid but jagged, and as he looked around, he realized they were no longer alone. Shapes began to emerge from the shadows, faces twisted and contorted with pain and despair. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, and their mouths moved as if they were screaming, though no sound came out. Noah's heart raced as the figures drew closer, their movements slow but deliberate. He could feel their anguish, their torment, as though it were a physical force pressing against him. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice trembling. "This is what awaits those who choose the path of the beast," Jesus said, his tone heavy with sorrow. "They are lost, bound by their choices, unable to turn back." Noah's eyes widened as he noticed something on the foreheads of the figures. It was faint but unmistakable. A number. 3 digits, glowing faintly in the darkness. 666, Noah whispered, the weight of the realization sinking in. "It's real." Jesus placed a hand on Noah's shoulder, grounding him. "It is written in the book of Revelation," he said, "and it is coming. Many will be deceived, Noah. They will take the mark, believing it will save them, make their lives easier, but in doing so, they will lose what truly matters, their souls." Noah felt tears streaming down his face. "Why would they do that?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why would they choose this?" Jesus' gaze was steady. "The beast's greatest weapon is deception," he said. "The mark will not come as something evil. It will come as something that seems good, something that promises safety, convenience, and unity. But those who take it will not understand the cost until it is too late." The scene around them began to shift again. The darkness faded, replaced by a bustling city filled with bright lights and towering screens. People filled the streets, laughing and chatting as they lined up at kiosks and booths. Noah watched as one by one they rolled up their sleeves or extended their hands, receiving a small, glowing mark. The process seemed quick and painless, and the people left the booth smiling, their faces filled with relief. At first, it seemed harmless, almost normal. But as Noah looked closer, he noticed something change in the people's eyes after they received the mark. The light in them dimmed, replaced by a cold, mechanical emptiness. They moved through the streets like puppets, their laughter hollow, their smiles forced. "They don't even realize what's happening," Noah said, his voice filled with despair. "That is why you must warn them," Jesus said. "Many will not listen, but some will. And for those, your message will be the difference between life and death." Noah turned to Jesus, his heart pounding. "But how will they believe me? I'm just a kid. Why would they listen to me?" Jesus knelt in front of him, meeting his gaze with an intensity that both comforted and humbled him. "Because the truth carries its own power," he said. "Speak from your heart, Noah. Share what you have seen. I will be with you." As he spoke, the scene shifted one final time. They were standing before a massive, glowing book, its pages filled with names written in radiant golden letters. Noah stared in awe, his eyes scanning the pages. He recognized some of the names, friends, family members, but then his gaze stopped on a name that stood out, glowing brighter than the rest. Donald Trump? Noah read aloud, confusion evident in his voice. Jesus nodded. This name is important, he said. He has a role to play in the days to come. Pray for him, Noah. Pray for all those who will stand in the battle ahead. Before Noah could ask what it meant, he felt a pulling sensation, as though the ground beneath him were giving way. He turned to Jesus, panic rising in his chest. Wait, I don't understand. What am I supposed to do? Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with a love so profound it brought fresh tears to Noah's eyes. Trust me, he said. You have seen the truth. Now go and share it. And with that, everything went black. Noah's eyes shot open and he gasped, his chest heaving as if he had been underwater for hours. The hospital room, once filled with the steady tone of the flatlined heart monitor, erupted into chaos. The doctors and nurses, who had all but given up moments earlier, now stood frozen, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. His mother, slumped against the wall in grief, turned toward the bed, her tear-streaked face registering what her heart could barely believe. "Noah?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she rushed to his side. She grasped his hand, which was warm again, alive again. "Oh my God, Noah! You're here, you're back!" Noah blinked, trying to orient himself. The light, the warmth of Jesus' presence, the visions, it all felt so vivid, so real. But now, as he looked around the sterile hospital room, the heaviness of the world settled on him. He saw the tears in his mother's eyes, the way his father was gripping the bed railing as if it were the only thing holding him upright, and the stunned expressions on the faces of the medical staff. One of the nurses stepped forward, her hands trembling as she checked his vitals. This doesn't make sense," she murmured, shaking her head. He was gone. There was no pulse for over 10 minutes. A doctor snapped out of his stupor, his professional demeanor returning as he began issuing orders. "Let's get him stabilized and run a full workup," he said, though the disbelief in his voice was unmistakable. But Noah wasn't focused on the medical commotion around him. He turned to his mother, his hand gripping hers tightly. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with urgency. "I saw him." Tears streamed down her face as she stroked his hair. "Saw who, sweetheart?" "Jesus," Noah said, his words trembling with emotion. "I was with him. He told me things I have to tell everyone." Her heart clenched as she looked into her son's eyes. There was no mistaking the sincerity, the depth of what he was saying. Whatever had happened in those moments when his heart had stopped, it had left a mark on him, a mark deeper than any physical scar. "Noah," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What are you talking about? What did he tell you?" Noah hesitated, his mind racing as he tried to put the enormity of his experience into words. "There's something coming, Mom," he said finally. "Something that's going to look good, like it's meant to help people, but it's not. It's a trap. He called it the mark of the beast." The room fell silent. His mother's tears slowed as she stared at him, her expression shifting from relief to a mix of confusion and unease. One of the nurses who had been standing by the door made the sign of the cross. Even the doctors, who had been busying themselves with medical equipment, seemed unable to ignore the weight of Noah's words. "It's real," Noah continued, his voice gaining strength. "I saw people lining up for it. They didn't know what they were doing, but once they took it, they weren't the same. It took something from them, the part that makes them, them." His father cleared his throat, stepping closer to the bed. "Noah, are you saying this was a vision? That Jesus showed you this?" Noah nodded, tears filling his eyes. "He showed me everything, Dad. He told me I have to warn people. He told me to tell everyone not to take the mark, no matter how good it seems." His parents exchanged a look, their faces pale and full of uncertainty. But before either of them could respond, Noah added, "And there's something else. He showed me a name." The room seemed to hold its breath as Noah struggled to get the words out. "Donald Trump," he said finally. "Jesus said his name will matter in what's coming." His father's brows knitted together, his mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. His mother shook her head, her lips moving silently in a prayer. One of the nurses whispered, "Lord, have mercy," before quietly stepping out of the room. The days that followed were surreal. News of Noah's miraculous recovery spread quickly, first through the hospital, then through the small town. Reporters showed up at their doorstep, eager to hear about the boy who had died and come back to life. His parents tried to shield him from the media frenzy, but it wasn't long before his story reached the ears of church leaders, pastors, and even skeptical scientists, all wanting to understand what had happened. Noah, still recovering from his ordeal, found himself thrust into the spotlight. He spoke hesitantly at first, unsure of how to explain what he had seen. But as he shared his experience with more and more people, his voice grew stronger. He told them about the golden light, about the overwhelming love and peace he had felt in Jesus' presence. He described the visions of people lining up for the mark, their faces filled with hope, but their eyes growing lifeless as they received it. "The mark isn't just a symbol," Noah told a gathering at his church, his voice steady despite the crowd of hundreds hanging on his every word. "It's a choice to trust the world instead of God. And once people make that choice, they lose something they can't get back." The congregation sat in stunned silence, some openly weeping, others gripping their Bibles as though holding onto them for dear life. One man stood up and asked, "What about Donald Trump? Why did Jesus mention him?" Noah hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. "I don't know everything," he admitted, "but Jesus said his name will matter in the days to come. I think we're supposed to pray for him. Maybe he has a role to play in what's coming. Maybe he's part of the fight against the beast." As his story spread, it sparked a wave of renewed faith and fervent prayer in the community. People who had grown distant from their faith began returning to church, seeking answers in Scripture and finding hope in Noah's testimony. But not everyone believed him. Some dismissed his story as a hallucination, a side effect of his illness, or the trauma of near death. Others accused him of making it up for attention, though anyone who spoke to Noah could see the sincerity in his eyes. For Noah, the hardest part wasn't the skeptics. It was the responsibility. He was just a kid, and yet he felt the weight of the message Jesus had given him, like a stone on his chest. Some nights, he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the vision over and over in his mind. The glowing book, the lines of people, the name of Donald Trump. It all felt too big, too overwhelming. "Why me?" he whispered into the darkness one night, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Why did you choose me?" But deep down, he already knew the answer. Jesus had said it himself. "Speak from your heart. Share what you have seen." And Noah, no matter how scared he felt, was determined to do just that. As the weeks turned into months, Noah's story spread far beyond his small town. Videos of him sharing his testimony in church were uploaded online, going viral almost overnight. People from all over the world began reaching out, some to praise his courage and faith, others to question or challenge his story. Noah's life once quiet and unremarkable, had been transformed into something he could hardly recognize. Everywhere he went, people stopped him. Some cried as they thanked him for inspiring them to return to God. Others bombarded him with questions. When would the mark of the beast appear? How would they recognize it? What did Donald Trump's name mean in all of this? Noah did his best to answer, but the truth was, he didn't have all the answers. He was just a boy who had been shown a glimpse of something far greater than himself. All he could do was repeat what Jesus had told him and hope it was enough. But not everyone was so kind. As Noah's story gained traction, skeptics and critics became more vocal. Online forums and news outlets debated the legitimacy of his experience. Some labeled him a fraud, accusing his family of exploiting him for attention. Others suggested his visions were nothing more than hallucinations caused by the trauma of his illness and near-death experience. Noah tried not to let the negativity get to him, but it wasn't easy. He was only 12, and the weight of the world seemed to rest on his small shoulders. One night, after reading a particularly harsh article online, he broke down in tears. His mother found him in his room, his face buried in his hands, his sobs muffled by the pillow. "I didn't ask for this," he cried. "I didn't want any of this." She sat beside him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, her own voice trembling with emotion. "But God chose you for a reason. You've already touched so many lives, Noah. Don't let the voices of doubt drown out the truth." "But what if I can't do it?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What if I'm not strong enough?" His mother pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "You don't have to be strong enough," she said softly. "You just have to trust him. He'll give you the strength you need." Those words stayed with Noah, echoing in his mind as he continued to share his story. Despite the challenges, he knew he couldn't stop. He had seen too much, felt too much to turn away now. And the urgency of the message he carried only grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, Noah was invited to speak at a large faith conference in a nearby city. It was the biggest crowd he had ever faced, thousands of people packed into an arena, with even more watching online. As he stepped onto the stage, his heart pounded in his chest. The lights were blinding, the applause deafening. For a moment he felt small, insignificant, like a child pretending to be something he wasn't. But then he remembered the warmth of Jesus' hand on his shoulder, the steady reassurance in his voice. "Speak from your heart. Share what you have seen." Taking a deep breath, Noah began to speak. He told them about the golden light, about the peace and love he had felt in Jesus' presence. He described the visions of the mark of the beast, the lines of people unknowingly giving up their souls for something they thought would save them. He spoke about the book of life, about the name that had stood out to him, Donald Trump, and the mystery of why it mattered. As he spoke, the crowd hung on his every word. Some wept openly, clutching their loved ones. Others nodded, their faces filled with a mix of awe and determination. But it was what happened next that truly stunned everyone. As Noah finished his story, the crowd erupted into applause, but before he could step off the stage, a figure emerged from the shadows, walking toward him. At first, Noah couldn't see who it was, the bright stage lights obscuring their face. But as the figure came closer, the crowd began to murmur, their whispers growing louder until they became a collective gasp. It was Donald Trump. Noah's heart raced as the former president stepped onto the stage, his expression calm but serious. He approached Noah, extending a hand, and the boy hesitated for only a moment before shaking it. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. "I've heard your story, Noah," Trump said, his voice steady and deliberate, "and I believe you. The arena erupted in chaos, cheers, gasps, even a few cries of disbelief. Noah stared up at Trump, his mind racing. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times since he'd first seen the name in the Book of Life, but now that it was happening, he didn't know what to say. Trump turned to the crowd, raising a hand to quiet them. "This young man has seen something we all need to pay attention to," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. "I don't know why my name came up in his vision, but I do know this. We are living in dangerous times. Faith, family, and freedom are under attack, and we must stand together to protect them." The crowd roared in agreement, but Noah barely heard them. His mind was spinning, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Trump turned back to him, his expression softening. "You've been given a gift, Noah," he said. "Don't be afraid to use it. The world needs your voice." As Trump left the stage, Noah stood there, overwhelmed but resolute. He didn't understand everything, why Trump had appeared in his vision, why he had chosen to come tonight, but he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The fight against deception, against the beast, was far from over. But Noah wasn't alone. He had his faith, his family, and now an ally he never expected. As the crowd chanted his name, Noah closed his eyes, silently praying for guidance. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered. "I'll do my best. Just show me the way." The story, he realized, wasn't about him. It was about all of them, about everyone who would face the choice between the truth and the lie. And he would do everything in his power to make sure they were ready.